In this video in our series, we're going to look at interpersonal relations, and specifically we'll look at various components that could be important to developing interpersonal skills, what preferences people might have and how they interact with others, and then we'll look at influencing styles. Obviously, interpersonal relationships are important to performance. We need to get along with the people in our team. We need to get along with our staff. We need to get along with other departments. We need to get along with the public, suppliers, customers, whatever. So the ability to develop interpersonal relationships and trust and gain support are all very important to having higher levels of performance. When we're looking at interpersonal skills, we also include emotional intelligence, but in this case I didn't add it as a chart. Generally, how we do that is we take various components that we've already discussed and we put them together and have a scale of emotional intelligence. In this case, we didn't want to do it just to not be repetitive. When we look at interpersonal skills, one of the first things that we look at is overall people skills and how good our individuals will relate to other people. And in this case, we can see that our group is all pretty good. Our scale now changes from 0 to 50, and our people are pretty well average in their people skills. There may be some correlation between higher levels of introversion, although I think introverts still have pretty good people skills. They just go about it in a different way, but there may be some correlation there. But as I say, we're not going to be overly concerned about that. Depends on the role again. Is it very, very highly people-oriented? Then that might be a concern if we wanted to see people up here. But in general, our group's going to be pretty good. Positivism and negativism in the workplace is very important. We want to have an idea of how negative our people are. And again, we're pretty good there. In this case, below is a preferred score, so we're all pretty close to that. Our team is pretty similar to that. If we were seeing individuals or a group higher up in this level, that would be of concern. We know that performance is directly related to how positive people are. Positive attitudes of an individual or a team or a manager or even a culture can influence change, growth, development, and overall performance. So we certainly want to be aware of that. And also, in building interpersonal relationships, it's very important to go at it from a positive perspective. You'll get a lot farther than if you're negative. Looking at assertiveness, our people are generally average in assertiveness. A little bit above for a couple of cases. B and C tend to be a little bit above. And then out of our group, D is a little bit lower in their scores. This is not critical. And again, it's how assertive do we need people to be in the role. If we need them to be fairly assertive, then we start to shine a spotlight a little bit on candidate D. And if we need them to not be assertive, then we tend to see B and C as perhaps having issues. What's significant here is to correlate this with other components such as behavior control. And in the event that B and C did not have good behavior control, then this assertiveness could be like anything else. When there's too much of it, it can not necessarily be a good thing. But in this case, I think that we're pretty good with our people. When we look at awareness of body language, this is a key component of communication and building interpersonal skills, to read the other person, not only to listen to them, but also to interpret what they're saying via taken with a grain of salt, some awareness of body language and how they're approaching things. Our people, again, are pretty good at that. B and C tend to stand out. B, C, and D, or E, tend to stand out a little bit more than A and D. Again, if it was an issue, we would start to look at developmental programs for A and D. Depends on the role. This can also, again, be correlated when we talked about concentration and awareness of people in the environment. People with that skill set then are going to more likely be more accurate in their interpretation of body language. We need to be careful because sometimes we may read into things that aren't really there. So that combined skill set where we're very aware of our environment, we're not being distracted, we're flexible in how we look at things, can help us to be more accurate in our interpretation of body language. And then when we look at social networks, these are when there's groupings or relationships that we're aware of in the workplace, and our group generally is going to be very good at realizing that they're there, being members of a social network, being able to access and communicate with members in a social network. The only one that might have some difficulty with that would be D, and that's probably in recognizing the presence of social networks, but certainly in influencing and gaining support is very important to understand the interrelationships between other people and then to leverage them to your advantage when you're there and accessing them. Then when we look at various forms of interaction, what we've done is we've divided it into three categories: givers, takers, and matchers. And our definition of a giver is somebody who does things for others that doesn't expect any reciprocation. Our definition of a matcher is somebody that will do things for others but expects something in return. And then our definition of a taker is somebody who doesn't do anything for others but just takes from others all the time. So when you put it in those very simple terms and we look at our people, we can see that A and B tend to be givers, which is fine. And we see dominant traits in E, C, and D tend to be matchers, again, which is fine. The only one that starts to creep up a little bit from a taker perspective is C, but they're not. That's not a dominant trait, so they're not going to have that as they're taking from the others all the time. I think that you can probably see if we have givers matched with takers, that the takers could take advantage of the givers, and this could break down interpersonal relationships and trust in each other. Matchers and givers are no problem. We want to encourage givers not to be taken advantage of. In this case, we know that B will not because they have high assertiveness scores, but we just want to be aware of these tendencies in people and to head off any potential problems and to mitigate any differences that may exist between our various team members. So in this next section, we're looking at influencing styles. And obviously, influencing is a big part of interpersonal relationships, a big part of managing people, getting support from other people, leading people, convincing people to do things in a different way, to change. And obviously, it is interrelated with communications. In this case, our two main techniques are what we call push and pull influencing. And we can see from our team results here that the team tends to gravitate towards more pull influencing techniques rather than push influencing techniques. And we can see that as the dominant approach of all of our team members. When we're looking at push techniques, what we're referring to is we spread out member A's individual file. What we're seeing is use of more aggressive force, using leverage to influence people, relying on rules and standards, exchange, or I'll give you this if you do this for me, more direct persuasion and assertion. Whereas when we're looking at pull influencing techniques, rather than telling somebody the direction that we want them to go, we will pull them along with us. And here people will use personal magnetism, the ability to create a vision that people will adhere to and follow, the ability to build consensus, to create an environment where collaboration will occur, and then joint problem solving. So those would be the components of pull or push that people will gravitate towards when they're trying to influence other people. So as I said, everybody seems to be very strong in the push side or the pull side, and that is most significant in person B, who is strong at both. And from that, as long as they have a certain degree of flexibility, they're going to know when to move between push and pull techniques, and even when to move between the individual approaches that'll be most effective when dealing with other people. So then that would also correlate with their ability to read other people, so interpretation of body language, their ability to communicate the techniques properly based on their knowledge of what the person would like to receive from them. So again, you can see how everything correlates and how people who are strong in a number of different areas and are flexible can move between them and be most successful. In that case, then we would say that A might struggle to a certain degree, and D might struggle to a certain degree with their ability to influence the people around them. When we do look at A, we can see of their styles, again, push is the weaker, pull is where they're going to gravitate to, and within that, creating the environment and joint problem solving is going to be their go-to techniques. Whereas if they have to rely on push techniques, force, exchange, and persuasion would be the way that they go. Here we can see much different scores with B, who's a stronger influencer. We can see that their ability to create the environment is very strong, but also their personal magnetism to pull people along, their ability to joint problem solve and to engage other people in joint problem solving would be very, very strong for them as well. When they need to, they can move to the pull techniques, and here exchange, which can be kind of in the middle between push and pull. It's not as I don't think as push oriented as the rest of the techniques. And so again, that, but also becoming somewhat assertive, and we saw that with B before in a previous chart. They tend towards assertiveness, and so they will use those techniques as well. When we look at C, again, joint environment or creating an environmental where collaboration will occur, and we're actually seeing that across the board. E, that's their strength, and also D is strong as that as well. So that may be a factor of the environment that they're working in now, that they're all in that type of environment of collaboration, perhaps within the team or within the organizational culture as a whole. But when we again look at C, they tend to have strengths across the board, more so than A, can adapt to various push or pull techniques when it's required. Will have a tendency a little bit more towards the pull techniques, but as long as there's flexibility there, they're going to be successful. And then when we look at D, it's similar pattern. We're seeing joint problem solving and environmental collaboration, creating the environment for collaboration as their key strengths, and would be a little bit weaker on adhering to rules and using exchange, which is somewhat surprising. An element of persuasiveness there as well. And then finally, when we look at member E, we can see that there's the ability to set the environment of collaboration, personal magnetism as well. Their weakest trait would be envisioning. And again, when we look back to some of the things that we said about member E before, we were saying that they tended to have the cognitive capability to move to a higher level leadership role. That requires visioning. And so they have the capability to create the vision, but are they using their vision as an influencing technique as much as they could? So there, in their case, particularly if we're thinking of moving them into a higher leadership role, managerial role, it becomes important to identify this more so than in anybody else's case, because if they can't use their visioning as a leadership technique, they're not going to be as successful as they could otherwise. Other than that, their push techniques are all fairly similar, and they will rely on them when they need to. But from a developmental standpoint, I would say, depending on what we want to do with member E, that we might want to push that skill set. And let's not forget, it doesn't only have to be from the identification of the weakness. Sometimes what we can do is say, let's build on our strengths, what we're good at, to get those results as well.